Welcome back to Shop Talk for Season 5. I'm Brandi.
And this is James. We talk about all things related to mental health and cross-cultural workers.
So glad you're here. Hi, friends. Welcome back to Shop Talk. Glad you're here with us today. And James, who are we talking to?
Excited to have Dr. Tasha Mitchell on. She currently serves as a clinical director at Willow Creek Counseling Center. She received an MA in mental health counseling from Asbury Theological Seminary and a PhD in counseling, education, and supervision from Regent University. In addition, she's a licensed professional counselor supervisor in the state of Kentucky. Along with her role at Willow Creek, Tasha serves as clinical supervisor at the Van Tatenhove Center for Counseling at Asbury Theological Seminary, overseeing clinical interns from the seminary's counseling program. She also works as an adjunct faculty member at Montreat College in Asheville, North Carolina. Prior to her work at Willow Creek Counseling Center, she held clinical positions in both inpatient and outpatient settings, serving those struggling with addiction and substance-related issues. She's certified in Prepare and Enrich, Gottman Level 1 training. She's passionate about seeing individuals be the healthiest and happiest versions of themselves and utilizes a holistic approach to help clients overcome life's challenges so they can live their lives to the fullest. We're really excited to have her on because I came across her dissertation while working on my own. And as I was reading over it, I was like, wow, this stuff really matters. So she wrote her dissertation on predicting missionary burnout through emotional intelligence, resilience, and leadership. So great to have you on and talk about some of the
Yeah,
research and the work you did.
yeah.
Yes,
Thanks for having me.
absolutely. Absolutely. I enjoyed reading, the parts of your dissertation I understood. So maybe, maybe a few of the research methods, I was like, I remember taking research methods, but I don't
Yeah,
remember this. But I really enjoyed looking over it. I think it's going to be a rich conversation today. So just
awesome.
wondering what led you in this direction? You're thinking about writing your dissertation. How did you finally
Yeah,
hear?
yeah. So to be perfectly honest, I would have never anticipated getting my PhD. So the whole research side of it was very intimidating. But so I spent about 9 years doing ministry work. So I was a part of the International House of Prayer. I actually got my undergraduate biblical studies certificate there. And then there was several different
Kansas City?
organizations in Kansas City. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was part of on staff with them for about 9 years. And in that process, I worked for another organization that was an anti-human trafficking organization and basically lived in their safe house, working with women coming out of human trafficking. And I was in New Zealand for about 4 months and worked. I was like a intern mom, lived in the intern house with the interns, and they were there doing kind of like a biblical studies internship. And in that process, near the end of my time there, I worked as a lay counselor. So I wasn't licensed or anything. We were just we took like a course through the AACC. I think it's the American Association of Christian Counselors, and there was a licensed counselor who was kind of overseeing us. And so in that process, something I witnessed frequently was just a lot of things done, unfortunately, in a harmful way, but with really wonderful intentions. And mostly just out of a lack of not knowing. And I think it made me realize, wow, like there's a need for more information and more knowledge here. And I think in that process as well, I wasn't on the field necessarily as a missionary, but I worked alongside of a lot of missionaries. And as a mental health counselor, I have a lot of friends who work as pastors, and they've sent me people that they've worked with in ministry and or people who are kind of on furlough, who are home from the field. And just the intense pressure that some of these individuals are under just really made me realize, wow, this is a big problem, and there's not a lot out there looking at how can we improve this. How can we make it better? And I actually worked with a team who was in a creative access nation for a little while. And I found something really interesting that I found was that the challenges that the team had they weren't new based on the location they were in. These were problems that they probably had at home, but now are in a pressure cooker. And so they're magnified. And I was just like, wow, like if there was some extra training or things that missions organizations could do, could they help prevent this from even happening so that people aren't coming back burnt out after being in ministry or being overseas, which I think I picked missionaries specifically because the pressures of the nuanced experience of being abroad in a different culture are just so complex, but I think the reality is there's a lot of people in the US and in other places in ministry that also experience burnout. And so I think my hope was, if I go after this most intense group, maybe that will, give us some insight into a direction for kind of helping reduce this burnout thing that's happening.
Yeah, we can affirm those. It is a pressure cooker.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've had people on and we've talked about things like resiliency and burnout, but I wonder if you could just do a kind of a brief overview of like what is burnout and even on the spectrum of where burnout sits, kind of what it looks like and some of those symptoms, and then we can talk a little bit more about resilience and then how you found your way to emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. Burnout is a interesting topic right now because it's kind of one of those hot button things. I think a lot of people are like, I'm burnout, and so it's like,
Right.
are you, aren't you? What does that mean? And so I think the challenge with it is that there's not a lot of clear guidelines around what burnout is. There's not a mental health diagnosis. The CDC does have some guidelines about what burnout can look like, and it's kind of like a additional kind of code you could maybe add that saying, burnout has to do with psychological exhaustion or emotional exhaustion from certain work experiences. And so it's very like work related. The definition that I used was from Maslow, which is who has like kind of one of the premier primary burnout assessments, which is the Maslow burnout inventory. And so that's basically looking at this like psychological exhaustion, and the connection they're really making is with it's emotional exhaustion, and a lot of times it's looking at people, first responders, people who are working, medical professionals, people who are exposed to human suffering, and the toll that that kind of takes on someone emotionally, to the point where they're kind of almost like a flatline emotionally, like they're feeling disconnected, kind of out of body.
No.
They're feeling numb and kind of dissociated. And so that's kind of what we found. And it's interesting. Some of the research I looked at talked about how the intense expectations of today's world has almost ramped up. Like burnout wasn't really a thing back in the 70s and 80s. This is like a newer phenomenon.
And people still
And
worked
it
hard
was
back then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it really came out of the burnout term really came out of research with those people who were like in the hospital working with victim, people who are suffering, military, people who are like right in it, firefighters and in the thick of it. And so it's really been in the last couple decades that this phenomenon of burnout has kind of come out, and they're saying the intensity and the expectation that's being put on people is overwhelming them. And so that's kind of it's hard because there isn't like a clear, this is burnout, these are the marks that we define it, because there's such a broad range of definitions you can look at. But I think we're really looking at that emotional exhaustion that's starting to cause people to not feel empathy, they're not able to connect, they're just feeling really shut down.
I wonder if there are specific things related to burnout that you see with cross-cultural workers that maybe you wouldn't see in the general population dealing with burnout.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from my personal experience, because obviously, like my research was quantitative, so I sent out an anonymous survey, so I didn't get to have a lot of those conversations with people. But I think in my personal experience, I think one of the biggest pieces I see that people describe is just the lack of empathy. They just like don't care. They're like, I don't care. I don't care anymore. But they know that they should, like they want to, the desire is there, but they just like, I just feel disconnected and I feel like I can't care for anyone else. And so I think that's one of the biggest qualities that I've seen, that I can't say it's not true for people outside of that, but I think that when people tell me they feel like something is wrong, that is the thing that they kind of identify, that they're like, I know I should care more, but I just don't. Like I just don't care. And that's usually kind of like okay, yeah, that's concerning. Because the reason you're wherever you are is because you did care and you wanted to be there. So it's like
Right.
it's such a, most people get into service fields because they want to take care of people, but Some people are looking to make money. Some people are doing different things. But like missions is very specific. People aren't going
We're not making money.
yeah.
No,
People aren't
there's
going to
not the
make a
money.
buck.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just this reality of like, even for counselors, there's maybe a different element of how you got into counseling or why you chose that profession. But missions is a calling. In the way that people talk about it, they tend to talk about like a calling or some kind of emotional experience that brought them to this decision to then go live abroad. And so in the case that we're talking about specifically people that live abroad, I believe you can do missions anywhere. So but that's a bigger conversation. But I think when the reasons are so specific and so personal, to feel this shift so far away from that of like I feel numb, I don't feel any emotional connection to the work I'm doing, I don't like feel like I can care for the people that I'm working with. That's like, okay, that seems to be a huge disconnect from the person you were when you came to the location you are or to the work you're doing.
Sounds like some crossover with compassion fatigue.
Yeah, I think you get this whole spectrum of,
Mm.
compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, burnout. And so I think there are definitely aspects in overlap. And I think compassion fatigue and burnout can have a lot of overlap and kind of blend together. I think because of the like I was saying before, kind of the differing definitions, a lot of them could, outside of vicarious trauma is fairly specific in the sense of it's like someone who's experiencing someone's trauma secondhand consistently. But I think there's probably definitions of compassion fatigue and burnout that would be very similar. And so I think burnout is probably more
Mhm.
commonly used. And so that's part of
Right.
why I kind of picked that route. But yeah, I would agree.
So we've talked about burnout, and what about resilience then? That seems like that would be like maybe on the other end of the
Yeah.
spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think resilience ends up looking kind of like the opposite of burnout in some ways, but it's looking at the ability for someone to thrive in the face of adversity. And so I think that as we're looking at a lot of qualities that enable someone to bounce back. That's one big term that the research, a lot of the literature describes is like just this ability. It's not experiencing hard things, but it's when those hard things happen, someone is able to really bounce back or recover from those experiences. And so, yeah, I think resilience is a lot more, there's just a ton of research about resilience. And the specific definition I used is from Connor and Davidson, which is they're the actual their assessment on resilience is one of the kind of like primary assessments that's used. And so and they just have a ton of research on resilience, and people have been looking at resilience back, you know, quite early, I think in the 50s and 60s after the wars. They're looking at why are some people okay and some people not okay, and trying to kind of figure that out. And so I think that's where they kind of nailed down this reality where two people are having the same experience and one person's coming back mentally and emotionally okay and the other one is not. And so it's the kind of there's a lot of factors that play into what makes someone resilient, but the big piece is that whatever those factors are, they're able to kind of overcome or bounce back from that experience faster than maybe someone who isn't experiencing as much resilience.
We had a guy on recently who rephrased it to bouncing forward because you're different than you were before.
Oh
So it's
yeah.
just same idea, just a slightly like, yeah, you're in
Yeah.
a different place, but it is. I mean, you
Yeah, I like
even
that.
use the APA definition, which I use a lot when I speak on resilience. I like it. It's so
Yeah,
practical and
yeah.
straightforward.
Yeah, that's kind of, well, especially with doing research, you want to pull from those kind of tried and
That's right.
true
Yes.
definitions. So,
What'd
yeah.
you find when you started giving these? It looks like you did 394. Did I make that up?
I honestly don't know the number offhand, but yeah,
I just saw it.
it
Anyway.
was a
I remember
lot. Yeah, it
it was a
was,
big sample. I remember I noticed
yeah,
that
Yeah.
in the research. It was a big sample. Yeah.
yeah,
If
yeah.
anybody's thinking
So,
that doesn't sound like that many, you haven't done all of the fields of
oh
data
my
that are going to come
Lord.
with all of the surveys.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So I literally there's this book called the North American Handbook of Missionary Organizations.
Hmm.
And I literally went through it page by page. It literally just has like some brief stats about the organization, their
Wow.
website, and an email. And so I literally went through and copied. There's a lot of them in there. I'm going to be honest. I don't actually know how many, I think a few thousand, but I went through and just copied all the emails. And I did, I have to give credit where credit's due. I did hijack a few interns who had some work hours, and they did assist me, maybe not willingly, but they did assist me. And I just sent out emails to all these organizations and basically
Wow.
asked, hey, can you send this survey to your missionaries? And so, yeah, so it was, I'm really grateful for the amount of, we were nervous. We really weren't sure what the turnout would be. Some people got back and were like, hey, we don't really meet your criteria. Because some of the, it was a broad spectrum of different kinds of
Right.
organizations. And then some people were like, hey, no, we can't do this. And, I understand that everyone has their, different things, different rules, guidelines. And some people, I think something interesting that I kind of came across in the process was, the uncertainty about research. So it was like some people who got it, who maybe had a terminal degree or, who kind of had done some research were like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. And some people were really, they had a lot of questions. They were really kind of had some skeptical. And, the big thing with my survey, just a big aspect of it was anonymous, So
Right.
I did have, I actually got a little funding. I won a little award. And so I was able to give a $10 gift card, Amazon gift card to individuals who wanted it, who would give me their email, and then obviously deleted that later. Yeah. And obviously I understand some people are overseas. They're like, what am I going to do with this? But look, all my people overseas, they find a way.
Yes,
They
they
find a way to
do.
get
Yeah.
Amazon. I'm going to be honest. So I
Yeah.
was
Well,
like,
Amazon finds a way.
Yes, it does.
they find a way. And if not, they give it to someone they know who gets it to them. So, but yeah, that was a really sweet thing that I felt like I was able to kind of honor people's time and energy to give me that information. But one other thing that was really interesting was just the term burnout was a
Mm.
bit triggering for people. And the response that I had that was kind of like, well, are you gonna be able to tell that I'm burnout? And I was like, or it was like, I'm not burnout. And I was like, well, good. Then
Yeah.
then I want to know why. Yeah. And so I think that piece was interesting. And I think in the process, I realized it was kind of a bit of a learning curve for me, obviously, as a new researcher, which is the whole point. But I was like, my kind of pitch that I gave, I may have been more careful how I explained it, because when you're using research language, it's just so precise in that this is what it is. This is the question I'm asking. But the
Right.
reality was that like didn't mean anything to the people I was talking to, right? That matters to my professors. But so I realized in the process, I'm like, okay, I could have tweaked this a bit in order to help it maybe feel a little more accessible and a little less like, because I think the fear was there. Oh, I'm going to be able to look at this assessment and see that you're burnout. And I'm like, I'm going to be honest. I don't even know who's you.
Who you
Like,
are. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
I don't,
Right.
that's because it's anonymous. So I think that was an interesting kind of learning curve that I wish I maybe would have done a little differently. But I felt so grateful to get such a decent size sample come in. And the
Well,
time frame it did, I think that's really what allowed me to finish when I did, which was a little ahead of schedule. So that was a blessing.
That's amazing. How many
yeah,
people can say that?
Yeah, no,
I would,
not many I
yes.
know from experience.
it's
So,
tough.
I wonder if some people felt protective of their information. Like if they were dealing with burnout, a lot of times cross-cultural workers don't really want to, are hesitant to acknowledge that because they're hesitant about what's going to happen next. And if people are going to
Right.
say, "Oh, you're burned out, you're going to go off the field" or whatever. So I wonder if
Yeah.
that was part of it.
yeah, I think so. And I think that was part of the piece that I was like, okay, I could have communicated better about this maybe on the front end to help them understand, this is not about identifying whether or not you're burnout. And I'm not even going to know I won't know which information's yours. So none of this is going to get back to your organization. But I think something that I did find was I had a handful of people reach out and just kind of say, I am burnout,
Mm.
and say, I'm grateful that you're doing this because I experienced burnout in the past. And so I think that made me grateful, but also made me like wish like, I had more ability to like kind of serve, which is part of my hope in the future and kind of the work I'm doing now is to like actually serve that population in a broader way. But in that moment, I was like, oh, like to hear just a few stories because I didn't do qualitative, to have a few people reach out and feel like, hey, I'm grateful for this, but also it's bringing up a lot of things for me. And so,
I think there's a tendency for cross-cultural workers to wear burnout as like a badge of honor. Like, I've been burned out twice. How many times have you been burned out? And
Yeah.
then there's another category
Yeah.
where it's like because they're trying so hard to hide it because of potential negative consequences if somebody finds out that they're absolutely cooked, and
Yeah.
it's just complicated.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
kind of
It truly is.
what'd you find as far as like the results of your burnout survey before we get into the other things you assessed as well?
Yeah. So actually, interesting question that has like kind of a complex answer because, research. So I originally had planned to use the Maslow's burnout inventory, which was pretty just kind of straightforward. You have burnout, you don't. But what my committee had asked me to do, and I think I'm really grateful that I did it in the long run because it was not an assessment I was aware of, but I ended up using the Francis Burnout Inventory, which has two different scales. So it has a scale of emotional exhaustion in ministry, and then it has a second scale that looks at satisfaction in ministry.
Mhm.
And so it felt like in that process, we were able to have like a little more of a balanced picture because it's not just looking at, oh, you're burnout. It's like, okay, you might be exhausted, but you're also really loving what you do.
Right.
Which is kind of that piece that we were kind of talking about before of like resilience versus, because there is a reality that like there are people in the field who are exhausted, but they're actually finding satisfaction in the work that they're doing. And they're not just burnout. And so I think that was a helpful piece to kind of balance and allow people to express both and not feel like it was just one way.
Unfortunately
And
for you,
so,
more data.
yes, no, yes. And it was like another scale. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness. But yeah, but I think so. I didn't look because I was more wanting to look at what are the qualities in people who aren't experiencing burnout. I didn't look intensely at like kind of the ratio of people who had burnout versus not
Right.
burnout. I do think that is, and actually, it was really cool. This is a complete side note, and I don't know if it's relevant, but the individual who wrote, Dr. Francis, who made the Francis Burnout Inventory, I actually had to reach out to him to ask him to use his assessment for my dissertation, and he was just really supportive and encouraging. And he's like, "You need to do more research with the data you have," and so I think that's the reality. Is probably there's a lot more that could be done with that, kind of wonderful sample that I got, and so I do hope in the future to kind of continue and further the work that I've done, maybe after I have a baby.
Good plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us about some of the things you found.
Definitely found some interesting things. So I'll just give you like the questions that I asked because some of the specificness of the information is kind of like, why are you talking about that specifically? But a lot of it had to do with kind of the specificness of the research questions I asked.
Mm.
So I asked three research questions. The first one was looking at relationships between emotional intelligence, resilience, leadership, and burnout. So it wasn't a correlational piece at all. It was just looking at, are there relationships? And then the second research question was correlational. It was looking at, are there correlations between emotional intelligence, leadership, and resilience? And then the third one was looking at correlations between resilience and burnout. And so with the idea, like, do missionaries with greater resilience experience less burnout? Which the challenge with research questions, right, is some of them are kind of like, well, duh, yeah, probably, right? But the piece that I was really excited about was kind of looking at my second question, looking at emotional intelligence, leadership, and resilience and burnout. And so a big piece we found there was emotional intelligence, leadership, and resilience do have a positive correlation, meaning people with more emotional intelligence and more leadership abilities are more resilient. And there's also, we found, basically people with greater resilience do experience less burnout. So, and a lot of kind of what my study covered was there's a lot of research showing you can teach emotional intelligence and leadership. You can assess it, you can see where people are at with it, and you can train people, and it improves those experiences. And specifically, even with people in ministry and mission settings. And so I think that's a piece that I walked away with feeling really excited. Like, we could actually help people improve these aspects because one of the pieces that really struck me along the process was how many people that I've worked with in ministry settings, but especially in missions contexts, who are like, I'm in charge, but I don't want to. I didn't come to the mission. I love Jesus. I want people to know him, but I didn't come to the mission field because I'm this charismatic leader.
Yep.
I'm not a pastor. Like I'm, and so the thing that struck me was they're like, we're basically pioneering. We're doing something new that no one's ever done before. And I'm having to lead both my team and local teams and make decisions and manage budgets. And it's like, okay, you're like a little CEO
Yeah.
but you did not want to be. That was not your goal. And so I think that that was a really kind of a piece that I really wanted to capture, which I kind of encompass with the leadership piece, was just like, and not only do they end up playing the role unprepared, but they're seen that way in the church.
Right.
I mean, they may not be doing any of those things on the field, but they come home and it's like, oh, wow, you're living abroad, like the missionary. And I think that pressure that is put there is like a leadership pressure. Like I've had clients before describe to me, like, I come home on furlough and I am dead. I am broken. I am trying to recover. And people are coming to me like, can you lead a Bible study, or can you, because they're also desperate, and they're like, you must have something we don't have. And there's a leadership pressure there where they can't just go to church on a Sunday. Just in as much as a pastor, and it's obviously, I'm not saying that they're not just normal people, but there's a way that people look to them that has them in this guarded position that can make it even harder to kind of deal with those things. And so I think that's why it's like, okay, why are we not helping people develop those skills more so that they have the ability to handle it?
That's so good, Tasha. Because when I was looking through your work, I was like, okay, I really got the emotional intelligence and resilience part. And I was like, the leadership aspect was interesting to me and how that connected, and it makes so much sense. And so I'm glad you're fleshing that out, because that was something I was wondering about.
Yeah.
I know from our experience in Central Asia, like my husband was the director of the project and the director of the business and the director of the company, trying to keep things legal and above board there, and
Yeah.
that's not what we signed up for.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
just from that personal experience, it would definitely help. I think the training in that area, and just given the expectation that really could happen as part of your work, that really could happen, and just like how to handle that. So
Yeah.
And
yeah.
emotional intelligence is a developmental skill, so it's something we can improve at. People may have various levels of giftedness towards it, like empathy as an example, or a growth in self-awareness, but it's something that we can continue to develop. And research has said whenever we develop any one area of emotional intelligence, it actually boosts all of the other ones as well. So it's like this really comprehensive tool we have as a way of growing. And I love that you've been able to correlate it positively with leadership and resilience. I developed a
Yeah.
emotional intelligence training as a part of my dissertation, so
Oh, very cool.
this is
Well,
kind of
we'll use your
exciting.
training with
Yeah,
the missionaries. Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I think that's the piece that was just so exciting to me. And honestly, my committee really encouraged me, which I think is something I'm still working on personally, but they were like, you need to develop this so that mission organizations can use it. And so I think honestly that would be my hope, is to actually work with trainings that already exist and have research behind them. And I think it's a shifting, I think I see it shifting in more of a comfortability for missions organizations and the church to look at research as something that works with the mission, with the way. And like, this is not opposed to it. This is just looking at really hard numbers to say, hey, we really think this could work and this could actually benefit. And so my hope is that would be the case. And then the other piece, kind of from the first question that I found kind of coming out of the research, was really kind of niche and interesting. So on the leadership scale, there was a positive correlation with one of the scales called moral leadership and age. So it's basically the question asked, I don't have it in front of me, but it in gist, it asked, do you feel like the choices you have to make in your role match up with your morals? And the correlation that we saw was that the older an individual was, the more positively correlated these two pieces were. The feeling of making decisions that line up with their morals correlated with how old they were.
Hmm.
And
a
so
positive of getting older. Yes.
yeah. And so when I looked at kind of, obviously, if you Google, you can get like 20 different definitions of like where baby boomers start and Generation X ends and blah blah blah. So I picked a range, but it kind of broke down to the baby boomer Gen X were kind of the primary ones that were seeing that positive correlation, and then the millennial generation was not. And I didn't really get beyond the millennial generation in my sample, and or there was no other individuals kind of represented in that sample other than those three generations. But to kind of put it in easy language, conversational language, when it all boiled down, kind of what we were finding and what I was looking at was there's a shift from the previous generations to millennials in how they relate with kind of maybe organizational norms. And a lot of the research is saying millennials are very collaborative. We want to be involved, millennial here, so I can talk about the we, but they want to be involved in the process and decision making, whereas previous generations and organizationally, it's like they're okay with like top down, you give me orders, you tell me what to do. And so I think that and there's also a difference in beliefs that the Pew Research Organization was kind of picking up on. Like millennials are asking a lot of different questions about their beliefs than other generations. They're just challenging a lot of things. They're asking a lot of questions that previous generations just kind of took as this is what it is. And so that was also a piece that could be wrapped up into it. But basically what kind of to distill it all down, it was kind of like there may be something for the younger generations that's disconnecting with organizations that they don't, because it's like, why are they wanting to do it then? Because all the
Right.
research says that millennials are altruistic, they're more giving, like those are the common themes. And so it's like, well, why are they feeling this disconnect morally, especially because like missions is pretty kind of straightforward, like why you're going, And so the piece that we found is like, there's a disconnect maybe organizationally
Mhm.
with how organizations are running and how millennials are relating to that mission, because it's like they're choosing missions. So there's something about that they're on board with. But then there's some piece there where there feels like there's a disconnect. And I think it could be, now there's a lot of factors, right? Because, the limitations, if you will, which is that the individuals who are older, who are still on the field, may have worked through those things where people who, were not okay or who burn out are no longer there. So it could be that we got more people who are older who are not burnout or who are experiencing this congruence because they had of attrition. And so there's a lot of different pieces that could play, but I do think the literature showed a real shift in generational thinking. And it's like, okay, maybe there's a reality that organizations need to rethink how they're relating, and maybe some structural pieces, which I know is a big, political, there's a lot there that's loaded. But that was one of the pieces that I thought was interesting that kind of came out of some of the questions I asked.
Yeah, I think what's so helpful about that is it's not just an age thing. So we're not just waiting for millennials to mature into something else, right? And also
Yeah.
millennial. It is a shift,
Yeah.
a cultural shift in, I think, attitude towards employers in the broader sense, right? As we see, millennials
Yeah.
are far more likely to switch jobs and careers than previous generations. Previous generations,
Yep.
I'll work 50 years at this job I totally hate because that's just what I'm supposed to do. It's not happening anymore.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Yep.
And
Yep.
and organizations, I think, that aren't willing to change are just not going to have new people coming in because there's a really different expectation of from an organization, from what work means, from identity and calling, from what does ministry look like, what does cross-cultural life look like. It's different.
It
And
is.
there's no
Yep.
way to, if we don't do something to engage it, I think we're going to really miss out on future generations.
As the Gen Xer here, and to speak for the older
Hi.
people here. I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally relate to the comfortableness of, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. Okay, and that we do need to be more flexible with the upcoming generations and recognize it's not wrong. and how
Mm.
we've related to it isn't wrong. It's just the
Exactly.
shift. It's a shift, and we
Yes.
have to really be prepared for that.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think neither is wrong, right? It's just like, how do we find this balance? How do we find a way for these generations to really work well together as they're
Yeah.
doing the important work that they're doing?
I do think in general, millennials tend to be more
Careful.
emotionally, I was gonna say good thing. I was
Oh,
gonna say
okay.
good thing. Tend to be more emotionally aware and more comfortable with expressing that and sitting with their emotions than the older generations too. So that is a positive that they bring to the work. That I think there could be, correct me if I'm wrong, Tasha, a tendency toward more emotional intelligence with millennials.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's not something that I can be like, the research says that. But
Right,
I
right.
do agree. I think just like the shift, I think there is more emotional awareness. So I think that the emotional awareness doesn't necessitate emotional intelligence, but I think it
Yes.
does create a
Yes.
lot of possibilities and potentially a real openness to it. So I think there's that openness to potentially, like, where different people are going to respond differently to be like, do this training. And so I think there's a possibility that that millennials could be more like, well, okay, I'll, try something new, try something different. And so, yeah, but I mean, the reality is, especially when talking about missions, because there's such limited research, any of these questions could be a study really, because there's
Mm.
just not a lot of research out there specifically with missionaries. A lot in the workforce, which is
Right.
interesting. And that's where I pulled a lot of my information from. Because the workforce is pouring money and money and money. I mean, the challenge of finding an emotional intelligence, which actually, that was something Dr. Francis mentioned to me. He is one that he uses. And I was pretty far into things. We were about to just like launch it and go. And so I wasn't able to change my assessment at that time. But I think potentially a different assessment may have captured some of that information a little better. The one I chose was definitely adequate, but yeah, there were some pieces where it maybe could have been better for the population we were working with. But yeah, I agree, and I think I'd be interested to know, what that looks like generationally, especially for missionaries.
What would you use for assessing emotional intelligence?
So I use the TEAK, and I have the little it's the TEAK short form, so it's the
Mm.
Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire.
Right.
And so I think part of the trick was finding a free emotional assessment, or
Yep.
like pseudo free, because I mean the ones that they're using and that are really truly developed from like the original creators are like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and they're being used by these huge corporations, which good for them. But as a
Bad for
researcher,
us.
I'm like, I
Yeah.
can't, yeah, that's not working for me. So I think there was a kind of, because of the world of emotional intelligence and the direction it has gone, which I think should say a lot, because like if so many of these companies who have all the money to do all the research can see that this is really having a positive impact, doing all these trainings and assessments in the corporate world, I think that's really could be very transferable to the missionary world. But I
Mm.
think that's another barrier, is figuring out, okay, how do we assess this in a way that's accurate, but also not crazy expensive? Because
Yeah.
obviously that's going to create a barrier for missionaries and mission organizations.
Tasha, I'm wondering where you would like to see the research go after this.
I think the big piece that I would love is to just have some kind of training, to work with some other individuals who've either developed trainings for missionaries or taking some trainings, or taking some assessments, taking trainings specifically around emotional intelligence and leadership. And the reality is there's also some research around resilience that, those factors can actually be supported, and there's some training that can be done there as well. So I think looking at all three of those pieces, and just something powerful and educating, like just someone walking out knowing a bit more about what resilience is, what are some of the factors that help with it, that can help with those things. So I think my hope is that there'd be a training that I could offer to people, that organizations could use with their missionaries. And even if they're abroad still, I think looking at both like candidates, so people getting ready for the field, kind of looking at where they are assessment wise, but then also people on the field saying, hey, doing this is going to help. So it's like you may do it, and you may be like, I already know all this, okay, great. But for someone who might not, it could actually improve marriages. So I think you got a lot of team dynamics out there solo, right? You got a married couple who's out on their own, and there's a lot of elements there that are not just marriage related, that are team related, handling kind of like what you were saying, Brandi, all the things that your family was managing that you weren't a business. Maybe you weren't going on the field expecting to run a business, but there you were. And so yeah, just looking at all the context that that kind of training might improve. And so I think there's probably a lot of different pieces from the data I have that could be pulled out and just kind of analyzed to kind of learn more. But I think my biggest hope from the research I've done so far is to develop some kind of training that would help improve missionaries' experience and help people get less burnout.
That's great. I think if organizations would do that, it would solve a lot of the problems of having to have all of this conflict resolution training, because that's at the end of a problem. Whereas this would actually give
Yes.
people tools at the beginning. So it would be preventative in such a way that you don't have to invest so much time and energy in all of these conflict resolution and conflict management and some of the
Sending
leadership
people
managing
out.
stuff. Yes. Huge
Yes.
Absolutely.
investment
Yes.
and in that when
Hmm.
actually having a shared language around something that could be taught through emotional intelligence would give
Yeah,
people the tools they need to navigate those relationships better. I mean, the number one reason
exactly.
people leave the field is interpersonal conflict, and
Exactly.
we're often
Yeah.
And
shifting at the end as opposed to the beginning.
yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, think about our training, and they did the best that they could with the time and everything like that. This was 20 plus years ago, but there was nothing like this in our pre-field training. And so I just think what a difference it could have had if we'd have had these tools beforehand. So
Yeah. I think that's what I see a lot of times is that the reasons people leave the field, there are definitely context things, I think, but I think when team dynamics are so challenging, there's not a lot of resilience. There's not a lot of protective factors to help deal with the language barrier, how to get to the store, how to make dinner. Like all those pieces, I think become overwhelming when there's no some of those those protective factors there. So it's like, and people don't know how to communicate. And we see that every day in the United States. So it's not a new problem anywhere. But I think when you're put in a pressure cooker of the field and all those different pieces. And let's be honest, like a lot of these people are in unique situations with like 2 to 5 people,
Yeah.
and I tell one of the teams I worked with as a 2-person team, and I'm like, you guys are not married, but you're basically living in a marriage in a way,
Yeah. Work
because
together,
it's just
sleep
the two
together,
of
eat
you.
together.
You see,
yeah.
and you honestly see each other more than a married couple on average does, because you're with each other every day. You work together. You are the only people that both speak your language fluently. And so it's like when there's conflict in that relationship, or an actual marriage, I mean, that is a lot of pressure. And so I think if people had better, yeah, it's like, why do we only deal with the back end? Like dealing with the conflict. It's like, why don't we give people the skills so they don't have to have the conflict? So they know how to have a conflict well.
Right. Well, it's been so great to have you on, Dr. Mitchell. I just sent a cold email. It's not like we had previous connections. So thanks for being so
Yeah,
willing to jump on. Any last thoughts of
my
like
pleasure.
resources as people are looking for, if you came across trainings that are out there on any of these categories or
Um,
tools?
yeah, so most of the assessments used in my work are available. A few of them are only available for leadership or for dissertation kind of purposes. Well, the reality is I don't have the names offhand because in a way it's kind of like if I'm saying you could go do this, there's a lot that I'm saying there, but there are a lot of different emotional intelligence trainings that are free on kind of the free level. There's not as many
Mhm.
as kind of the paid ones. There are some that are maybe like for an individual are like affordable if
Mhm.
someone really was like, I really want to do kind of an emotional intelligence training. But I think honestly, I don't have specific books, but I think there are a lot out there, and a lot of them cover a lot of the kind of baseline pieces. Unfortunately, there's not, which I've actually been looking because I've had a lot of people ask me around the missions topic. There's not a lot of books or literature around these pieces. I think burnout, yes, but like I think that's the thing is there's a lot about the negative, but there isn't a lot about how do we help avoid this. But just looking at the more you can educate yourself on emotional intelligence, resilience factors, the more I am guilty as charged. I'm a counselor, but go to counseling.
Yep.
And that really helps. It can really help, just the awareness piece. But yeah, the more you can educate yourself on these topics, broad base, it doesn't have to be specific, but just kind of better understanding them, the more I think you can kind of help avoid and understand when you're getting to a place that's not healthy.
Sounds
Good
great.
stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I keep
Thank
calling you
you.
Tasha. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell.
Yeah, that's okay.
I've
great
called
to
you
have
Tasha
you.
the entire podcast. So maybe
No,
I should
that's
have checked
okay.
it.
Yeah, it's still a new thing to me. So
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
yeah. That would be really disappointing. Yeah.
It was. It really, really was.
Yeah. Very cool.
Also, yeah, whenever James makes a connection with someone, we have to ring a bell or something because James has connections with everyone.
Does he know them all? Yeah. Yeah.
He does. And if he doesn't know them all, he knows someone who knows them all. So
That's true.
Yeah, that's fair.
yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah. So.
Should we tell Tasha about us?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Hi,
Hi, Brandi. Yeah, I have no idea.
Hi,
who you
Tasha.
are.